Well,
There we go.
Molly, is anybody having any technical difficulties getting in? I know we've still got a handful more that are yet to zoom in.
I haven't heard anything so far, but it looks like now we're at 12 members in the meeting.
Oh, what about Christian Adams and Matt Brainer? I don't see that. All right, so let me have it now.
Well, let's see here. Bruce, Darlene was going to give an invocation. I know we're not quite there yet. I was gonna, if she doesn't jump in, would you mind?
Happy to.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning on behalf of myself and the committee. I want to thank everybody for zooming in today. My name is Shaw Blackman, Chair of the Governmental Affairs Committee in the House, and we're going to call the meeting to order. I will have a few remarks that I'm going to read and hopefully add some perspective. We'll hear from our Majority Leader Burns, and then we'll move in today's agenda. And if Representative Taylor is not here, Secretary Williamson, would you mind opening us first up in a word of prayer, please, sir? You're muted.
God could hear me.
All that matters.
Let's pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, Lord God, thank you for the gift of this day, Lord. Lord God, we just pray that you would reveal truth through the testimony today, and that's all this bipartisan committee wants, is to hear the truth, to stand on truth, Father, and that may everything that comes before the committee today be seasoned and tested by the Spirit, and we just ask all this in your precious Son's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. So earlier this year, some of our colleagues had concerns about election processes and policies. And Speaker Ralston tasked this committee with investigating to ensure that we conduct fair and transparent elections. We did so and made a number of recommendations that I think were positive ones. However, the 2020 elections, like all things 2020, became a next level challenge. We raised concerns about the conduct of this election early this year, and I think some of our fears were realized. The Speaker has now tasked our committee to reopen the elections investigation in order to answer new questions and discrepancies in Georgia's voting system that may have led to illegal votes being cast and counted in this year's elections, and to propose fixes required to close potentially glaring loopholes in the process. The Speaker has stated that Georgians deserve to trust and have confidence in their elections, and that Georgia must get it right. And we agree with that. Our purpose today is to gather information of what went wrong and how to fix it. That's the problem with the legislative branch here, to look into evidence of problems that warrant changes to the law as we did earlier this year. Perhaps our suggestions, old and possibly new, will be better received now. So picking up where we left off, COVID, new voting equipment, and mass absentee by mail voting led to many of the problems we witnessed back in the June primary. Similar and new irregularities emerged in November. Therefore, we seek to hear from various experts and examine evidence presented from witnesses and other stakeholders. Should we uncover anything criminal, that will go to the proper authorities for prosecution. And just as a reminder, we're not in a courtroom. No one is on trial here aside from the integrity of our elections. But it's clear something went wrong. Numerous reports of potential problems and failures in the general election in November have been alleged, some of them quite serious. And we intend to get to the bottom of it. So on a personal note, my wife and I have gotten to know many of the frontline poll workers and local officials, and we know how hard they work to conduct fair and efficient elections. We really admire and thank them for their dedication, and we don't want any of the conversation today to malign the character of these workers and volunteers who really serve us with great integrity. And just wanted to add that a quote from somebody who posted something on social media last night from Thomas Sowell. He said, when you want to help people, you tell them the truth, and when you want to help yourself, you tell them what they want to hear. So let's be expeditious, but thorough and fair, and let's be respectful of one another and the time we have allocated. Leader Burns, turn it over to you, sir.
Now, good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning.
Well, good morning to you, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair Jones, members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to let me be with you. Enjoyed being with many of you last week, this week, and at Biennial in Athens, and look forward to the second Monday in January when we will convene again. Mr. Chairman, I have a brief statement and some information I'd like to present to the committee, and then we will be sending something to them for their review. But before I do that, Mr. Chairman, a minute of personal privilege, if you will.
Of course.
Chairman Blackman has graciously let me come on this Zoom call this morning, and I am in Atlanta. I will be headed to Statesboro as soon as I get off this call to celebrate the life of Harrison Deal. I think everyone on this call and the sound of my voice has heard the tragic story of Harrison losing his life last week in an automobile accident. Our thoughts and prayers go out to this the family and the community of this fine young man who was a committed Georgian, who was making a difference in our state, and certainly his life would have made a tremendous difference. But I can tell you the legacy of Harrison Deal with his friends, his family, his community, and all of those he touched will live beyond his days and will have an impact on many Georgians that knew him, that will learn about him in the days that come as they learn about his life and what he stood for. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for that. And certainly we'll all continue to pray for that family. For my statement, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, many Georgians, including many of you, my colleagues, have had serious concerns and have serious concerns about Georgia's elections. As we approach a critical election on January the 5th, 2021, it is clear to me that Georgia voters must have confidence in the election process going forward. To that end, myself, along with over 100 current and newly elected members of the Georgia House of Representatives, submitted a letter to Secretary of State Raffensperger and to the State Elections Board. In this letter, we made two common sense suggestions for improving the security and efficiency of our elections process for the upcoming January 5, 2021 election and beyond. First, we suggested that the State Elections Board issue a rule to counties requiring that they allow independent observers from both parties to participate in the signature review process on both paper absentee ballot applications and the absentee ballots themselves once returned to challenge any invalid signatures. Secondly, we also suggested that the Secretary of State or the State Elections Board work with other state agencies to contract for additional support staff for county and precinct level elections operations to ensure compliance with all elections regulations and laws. We also pledged that as a General Assembly, we would provide any financial, fiscal support to help them carry out that process. Mr. Chairman, our suggestions to the Secretary of State and State Elections Board are simply to have every legal vote in Georgia counted. That is a bipartisan request that supports every Georgian voter, no matter which party they participate from. I believe it makes sense There's a path forward as precedent for issuing this guidance to the counties. And I believe, and I'm very hopeful that the Elections Board and Secretary of State will soon move forward with these recommendations. Mr. Chairman, I will submit a copy of this letter to the committee by email to you, Chairman Blackman, and ask that you distribute it to the committee for their review, that it be part of the record of this hearing. Thank you for your time today, all of you. Everyone be safe when they do travel, even on a Zoom call when you travel. So we ask everyone be safe and they have a joyous and happy Christmas holiday, and that we continue to do the work for our state and for our communities that we're bound to do. So, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the time and for the committee's time and this chance to bring this forward.
Thank you very much, Leader Burns. Very much appreciate you being with us this morning, and appreciate you presenting those. And certainly we continue to pray for the Deal family.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I noticed that a couple of people have their hands up. I'm going to go through a little bit of housekeeping, and then hopefully we can get to that point. There are a number of questions, I'm sure, for our presenters today. And if you will message me and Molly, we will put those questions in the order in which we receive them. Obviously, we're working with technology here, so we'll be doing the best we can. We may run into some issues, but if we do, we'll try to take care of those the best we can. I know many people have asked to testify and be a part of this process. We got as many today as we possibly could on the agenda, but we didn't get them all, so we'll have some more left over. This is our first meeting, but it is not our last. Also like to share that we did invite the Secretary of State to appear today, but they declined, and so many of our committee members had questions specifically for them. So we were going to budget some time at the end of the meeting so that everybody had a chance to make some comments. I say everybody, members of this committee, had time to make comments. And I see Chairman Fleming and Chairman Trammell. If that's appropriate, I would defer then to those comments so that we can get started on our agenda today. Mr. Ray Smith, did you have a statement that you'd like to make first?
Yes, Chairman Blackman, thank you very much. I'm Ray Smith. I am counsel for the President of the United States. There are two witnesses that you're going to hear from in the next few minutes, Christian Adams and Matt Brainerd. They are designated experts in the President's case of Trump versus Raffensperger et al. And out of an abundance of caution, they will be reading affidavit reports and will not be taking questions. However, if there are committee questions that want to be submitted in writing or by email to us, we'd be happy to try to get back to you all at a later time. But we ask that they just read their statements today. And then, of course, we'll be presenting a summary of our case at about 11 o'clock. So I just wanted to read that statement for the record. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Adams. I think I noticed you were on the call. Are you ready?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, you're there. So I've just asked if you start by maybe telling us who you are, a little of your background, and the floor is yours, sir.
Right. I don't want to tread on Representative Trammell. I think he had something.
I was still has his hand up. I have two hands up. I said Chairman Fleming and Chairman Leader Trammell. So let me. I didn't get a message from either one of them, so I thought they'd be okay at the end. But let me go to Representative Trammell first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to object for the record to what is about to happen. Offering witnesses without the opportunity for members of this committee to ask questions is fundamentally unfair, and it bespeaks a sham process. To the extent that this is an investigation to get to the bottom of it, we can all read. If they want to submit written statements, that's great. But I would ask that the witnesses be available for questioning. I also would like to state from the outset that the characterization of this is a bipartisan effort is simply not true. The recommendation to the state elections board, to my knowledge, no Democrats, at least no Democrats on this committee, are part of such a request. We had a successful election here in Georgia. Our Secretary of State has said over and over again that there aren't problems. To date, 55 cases in 8 states in 37 days have been dismissed. And I think that's a very important point to make from the outset. And I fundamentally think it is unfair to the state of Georgia for us to hear testimony and not have an opportunity to examine these witnesses. And furthermore, it is a violation of what we understood we were going to be here today. So I object to that process from the outset.
Noted. Chairman Fleming.
Mr. Chairman, I think my raised hand earlier was an inerrant hit on my screen. I apologize for that.
Understood. Representative Turner, did you have a comment?
Yes, sir. I would like to kind of piggyback off of what Leader Trammell is saying and ask you, Mr. Chairman, are we allowed to discuss amongst ourselves during this committee some of the things that are going to be presented here? Because I think we are very informed in this committee, since the majority of what is Georgia law today has come from this committee. And so if we hear something that isn't quite right, can we talk about that?
Well, I think both of our witnesses or the testimony presenters provided this morning, if they see fit to not answer any of the questions that we have, then they will have to be able to state as much, and we'll move forward and hear what they have to say, and we can ask them some questions. And if they are compromised and unable to answer, then that'll be something they'll have to let us know. Thank you, Representative Turner. Mr. Adams, you may proceed, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Blackman. My name is J. Christian Adams. I am the president and general counsel of the Public Interest Legal Foundation. That is a 501c3 charity that is devoted to this issue 365 days a year. We worry about election fraud and election integrity. I am today appearing wholly in my capacity as the president of the Public Interest Legal Foundation, and my remarks will be confined entirely to topics which have nothing to do with any expert affidavit which I may have been filed in a federal court case in Georgia. I was formerly an attorney at the United States Department of Justice in the voting section, where I reviewed a wide variety of issues, including your own Georgia congressional redistricting over a decade ago. I was a presidential appointee to the President's Advisory Commission on Election Integrity. I am currently a presidential appointee to the United States Commission on Civil Rights. I confine my practice exclusively to election litigation across the United States and even across the Pacific to Guam, where I have had a case involving voting rights for the last 10 years. I would like to talk to you today about two things. Number one, problems with mail balloting that generally occur around the country. And secondly, fixes to some of those problems. So let me start with mail balloting generally. I have 8 topics. I hope that I can keep your attention as I go through them. I will keep them fairly short on each topic. But there are 8 general problems with mail ballots. In summary, a mail election is probably the worst possible way to run an election. The worst. And I have 8 reasons for you. The first is that mail balloting disenfranchises voters. When you run an election in the mail, you are turning over your vote to the people who regularly deliver you your neighbor's mail. The post office itself says that their error rate is at best 5%. They have a goal in the post office for political mail of a 95% success rate. Well, you all know that that is a 5% failure rate. If you are 95% of the time successful with mail ballots, you fail 5% of the time. The Public Interest Legal Foundation has been monitoring mail balloting around the country, and there's some very fascinating data. For example, coming out of Nevada, where we were able to track in the primary and delivered this information first, that in Clark County, for example, 1.3 million mail ballots went out, 233,000 bounced because of the bad voter rolls, which I'll get to later, and 310,000 arrived. So it gives you a sense of what actually occurs in a mail election. But the bottom line is that mail balloting disenfranchises voters because 5% of them are lost, and even more of them are not counted because of errors that cannot be corrected. The second major problem with mail balloting is it destroys transparency. In other words, there is a value to having both sides watching the election, and that value is there's confidence in the process after it occurs. Now, isn't that interesting? One of the things that characterizes the 2020 election among many people, if not millions of people in your state, is a lack of confidence in the process. One reason that occurs is because mail ballots are voted outside of the view of election officials. Transparency is a good thing, and when you go to mail ballots, you lose transparency, which takes me to the third problem with mail ballots, is that ballots can be voted by other people. What I'm about to tell you is not speculation. I will give you a direct citation to a federal court opinion that discusses this in great detail. If you want to see how voter fraud operates with mail ballots, if you care about these issues, please read a case that I litigated in the Federal District of Mississippi, the Southern District, called United States versus Ike Brown. I represented the United States while at the Department of Justice. I have a citation for you. It's 494 F sup 2nd 440. I'll repeat that. 494 Federal Supplement 2nd 440. The case is United States versus Ike Brown. In that case, you will find page after page after page describing what happens when mail ballots go to people who are on the margins, who do not have economic power, who rely on the local government for their jobs, for their livelihood. And what you will find in that case are swarms of notaries, swarms of ballot collectors, voting ballots for people. This was live testimony in federal court by the victims who testified that other people came to their house and voted their mail ballots. This is not speculation. This is not a conspiracy. This is a judgment in favor of the United States of America. And you could read the details of which. One particular victim was named Susie Wood. She was regularly having other people voting her mail ballots. They would bring them to her house out of the mailbox, and they were regularly voting her ballots. When the judge interrupted our questioning of the victim and asked Susie Wood, why on earth would you be doing this? She said something I'll never forget. She said, Your Honor, the person coming to my house always knows who the best person to vote for is. That's in the opinion that I gave you that you can read. It's not isolated. But the third reason mail ballots are bad is it creates vulnerabilities in the system. The fourth reason mail ballots are bad is because they're going to bad addresses in Georgia. I can't speak entirely to the Georgia process, but I can tell you about Nevada. In Nevada, we went, and you could see a video if you Google Public Interest Legal Foundation Nevada video. We looked at the Nevada voter rolls, and we went to the addresses where people are registered to vote. And what we found are vacant lots, mines, liquor stores, pot shops, casinos, and other places like that where people are improperly registered to vote. And here's the important part. Mail ballots are being sent to these locations. Now in Georgia, we can tell you exactly how many people on the voter rolls there were dead, duplicated, living in other states, or had more than one registration. In fact, we use the most rigorous protocols possible to arrive at these conclusions and we've been doing this for years at the Public Interest Legal Foundation, directly figuring out which are the improper registrations. We did that for Georgia well before the election. So the fourth reason why mail balloting is bad is because it ends up having ballots being sent to bad registrations. The fifth reason that mail balloting is bad is because it creates storage problems. Now, there's been lots of news stories about ballots in suitcases showing up and so forth, but I will tell you, none of that surprises me because ballots have to be stored somewhere if they're all coming in the mail. And that results in a wide variety of zany solutions, such as suitcases. And so what it does is it creates storage problems and it creates paranoia about when people actually see how the ballots are being stored. If you're in a busy election in a room and you have a lot of mail ballots, sometimes they need to be put in strange places, like under the desk or over in the corner. But people without election administration experience don't quite understand how hard it is to run an election sometimes. The sixth reason why mail ballots are bad is because you cannot cure them. In other words, if somebody's sitting at their home on the kitchen table mistakenly votes a mail ballot and fills it out wrong or does the envelope wrong, they can't fix it. They mail it in, and these are the sorts of ballots that get rejected, that they get disenfranchised because it's hard to cure them. Contrast that with in person. When you vote in person and you make a mistake, your ballot can be fixed. You can change something. You can spoil a ballot under Georgia law, but you can't do that with mail ballots. Seventh, voters don't often know if their votes are not counted when they mail them in. They check out of the system. They don't follow up. They don't have time. They expect their ballot to be counted and would be shocked to learn how many ballots are not counted that are mailed in. So voters don't even know that they're being disenfranchised. Let me leave you on the list of problems, number 8, with probably the most important one. I saved the best for last. When you have a mail balloting system, election officials are not in charge of the process as much. It is decentralized. There's no central authority watching the system take place. You can't see it. You can't observe it. You can't fix it. You can't make it better. It's almost like you've created a system of chaos. And so election officials should be on top of the process directly, not 3 days after it mails if it gets to the office. It's important that the very good election officials in Georgia have a greater role to play, and mail balloting takes that away. So those are the 8 problems that I've observed around the country over the years with mail balloting. I urge you to please read USVI Brown, because it will show you how a system breaks down when it comes to mail ballots. Now, I don't want to testify to y'all and not have a fix. And so I have a number of solutions that I would suggest that I want to go through with you very briefly. But I'm going to give you the most important suggestion that I didn't talk about, and you might wonder what it has to do with mail balloting. The single most important thing that the Georgia legislature can do is to ban private money from being used to pay election offices. That happened this year with the Center for Technology and Civic Life. It's an easy fix. I have written this legislation already to be introduced in other states. Now, why is this important? This money was being paid by billionaires into Fulton County, DeKalb County, other counties, because they knew the vulnerabilities of mail voting. They're well known by anybody in the election administration. But when you have private parties funding government election offices, like happened to the tune of nearly $500 million this last election, it is unfair and builds structural bias into the system. So that is the most important thing, in my opinion, that the legislature can do is to ban private money from running election offices. The second thing that can be done is absentee ballots should be requested, not auto-mailed. The reason that is important is because the voter rolls have problems. And if you auto-mail ballots, you're mailing directly into those defects, into those problems. Next, absentee ballots should be requested for each election. People move, people die, people go into other states, they move away, they move within Georgia. So you should not have a system where you can request an absentee ballot for a primary and that carries over to the general election. Now, I'm aware that there was some litigation involving the Justice Department that relates to a runoff, but that's a different story. What I'm saying is for a primary, the absentee ballot request should not extend to the general election. Next, signature matches must be real. They must be real and not given the short shrift, because it's one of the few things we have to protect against what I described was happening in the case of United States versus Ike Brown. I had the occasion to review all of those signatures, and I started to notice a pattern that the signatures of the people notarizing the documents as a witness or requesting them were strangely similar. The notary and the voter looked a whole lot alike. And so signature matches give law enforcement and election officials a beachhead to start to confront problems when the system breaks down. So signature matches must be real. Another thing that Georgia should consider that other states have adopted is having identifying numbers on the absentee ballot or absentee ballot request, such as a driver's license, such as a voter card, some other uniquely identifying information that proves the person voting the absentee ballot is the correct person. This is not expensive. It's not complicated, but it's simple to do. And that is to have some sort of voter ID, such as your voter card number or your driver's license number, part of the absentee ballot process or the mail ballot process. Next, a witness requirement is a good thing. Now, I will tell you, this was attacked all over the country, but it is a good thing when you move to vote by mail to have some sort of witness. Next, you should consider limits on how many ballots one person may deliver. Other states have already done this. Or how many ballots one person may witness if you have a witness protocol. The next thing you can do to both make the system work better and increase confidence in the system is to have centralized, transparent counting. You have to have transparency throughout the election process if you want people to believe in it. And I think wanting people to believe in the election process as valid is essential to the democracy and to the democratic republic we have. And if you have centralized counting processes, they have to be transparent. Next, absentee ballots have to arrive by election day. How about that wild idea? The election day is election day. And if you cast a mail ballot, you actually have to have it arrive. Now, I was involved in litigation in Virginia that the Public Interest Legal Foundation brought against the State Board of Elections of Virginia because they passed a rule that dispensed with the postmark and said you don't even have to have a postmark and it can arrive late. Now, that was in conflict with statute. And I brought a case against the State Board of Elections and was victorious and enjoined the State Board of Elections against following that illegal rule that was conflicting with statute, which raises another and final issue that I'll mention. You have to give people in your state the right to sue for violations of these election rules. How might you do that? Well, one might be a mandamus, that if a county election official is ignoring the law that you pass, that somebody has the right to go in and enforce it. So you might consider your mandamus either common law or statutory rules regarding mandamus. You have to give people the right to enforce these laws, because right now there's a patchwork in many places where the laws are enforced one way and not the other way. Uniformity is a good thing. But I want to close by reiterating how critically important I think it is to ban the use of private money in government election offices, because private money should not be going into how we run elections. We don't allow private armies, and we shouldn't allow private election office funding. So that's my testimony, Mr. Chairman. I thank you very much for everybody's time and attention, and I will close my presentation there.
Thank you. I recognize it was mentioned ongoing litigation may prevent you from answering questions, but I did have a couple of comments, and I think a couple of people that may want to ask a question nonetheless. Chairman Powell, did you have a comment or a question?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I want to thank Mr. Adams for his testimony. Very clear. Some of us that have been in political office for a period of time have always identified that the #1 place for fraud, in our opinion, is the mail-in process or the absentee process. This was expanded back in 2005 in the state of Georgia against a lot of our wishes at that time. Now, that being said, one of the things, in lieu of the fact that the Secretary of State's office is not appearing today, I would like to ask a question of you. Some of us have said that we believe that the best thing that could happen right now, because of the failure of confidence for this election, was that the absentees or the mail-in and mail-ins, there should be an audit done onto these to see if there is any organized voter fraud based on matching of the signatures and things such as that. Could you address that? That might be out of your realm, but could you address that possibility of how we could implement an audit on these?
Thank you very much, Representative Powell. Yes, I can address that from personal experience. And look, there's nothing, I think an audit would have value if it's done correctly, but I'm going to tell you this. I had the power of the United States government, as well as my colleagues, in that case I talked about, United States versus Ike Brown. And we had the power of the United States Justice Department to attempt to basically do an audit. And I will tell you that it takes years. It takes enormous amounts of energy and time and manpower. I just don't want anyone to think that you can just start looking at a couple of documents statewide and reach many conclusions very quickly. It doesn't work that way. This is hard work. And look, I think an audit is always good to know the truth, right? But I just want everybody to go in with eyes wide open that these things take time, and it's not always fraud. And that's the other thing I want to emphasize is chaos. Chaos lends itself to its own outcome, and mail balloting creates chaos. And you don't have to have a conspiracy to commit a crime to still get a bad thing to happen. So I would be all in favor of always getting to the truth. I just want folks to know that it can be a long, long road to get there.
Anything further, Chairman Powell? Or
Well, I mean, I heard what he said, but I guess my specific question would be, in lieu of the fact that we have upcoming elections and we can't pass any type of law due to the fact that we can't go into any type of special session or pass any ex post facto laws, but is there any possible way that we could do a sampling audit of these type of votes to see if further litigation might have some of these votes or some of the areas possibly considered for banning if they were not properly certified by the election officials? I guess that's the point I'm getting to, because if that happens, then that we could take it to the next, possibly through litigation, take it to the next step.
Right. And look, if procedures were not followed in the statute, that is clearly a serious problem that you could audit and catalog. And I think some people have done that. And I'm going to try to steer a little clear of that topic. If I was doing this, here's what I would do. I would take the list of dead registrants that I know we created at the Public Interest Legal Foundation and I would look to see how many of those cast ballots. I would take the list of people who moved away from Georgia that the Public Interest Legal Foundation produced earlier this year, that moved away from Georgia, and how many of those cast ballots. That's not a complicated thing. It actually could probably be done in a day or two. But it's important to do it correctly, and not, as many people have made mistakes around the country. They don't think there's anybody else with your same name born on the same day. Well, there actually are. Everyone on this call probably has people looking at the board here with somebody with maybe one or two exceptions who have someone with the same name born on the same day somewhere in the country. So I think it has to be done correctly, but that's another thing that people should consider.
So then a step further than that, then, you know, to do a comparative list. So what process would we need to move forward with that? And I mean, we don't have, at this point, we don't know what the intention of the Secretary of State's office is. You know, they had said that there would be an audit done with the recounts, but, you know, there was a recount, but no audit. And that's the thing that's been of primary concern to a lot of us. So legally, and I'm not an attorney, but maybe you could give some advice to that. How could we move forward to implement these type of comparisons to the local boards of elections around the state?
Well, that's a very good question. I apologize that I don't have an answer for you for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is I'm not close enough to the Georgia process. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Representative Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Historically, Republicans have been the ones who have really used absentee mail-in voting, as you call it. But in this last election, we definitely did see more Democrats pick up and start to use mail-in balloting. We saw that 65% of Biden's votes in Georgia did come from absentee voting. And we saw that 35% of Trump's voters did use mail-in voting. That's almost 500,000 folks who voted for Trump who actually used mail-in voting. So clearly over time, mail-in voting has now become more bipartisan. And so it just seems kind of odd to me that you are testifying and launching an attack on using mail-in voting, because I just don't remember from other Republicans, I don't remember in general there being such an attack against absentee voting when it was mostly Republicans using it. So it seems to me that this new kind of upspring about Democrats, largely Black and brown voters who are using mail-in voting as of this year so much, it just really seems interesting to me that this is such a hot topic now about why people are using mail-in and exactly the process that goes along with it. I mean, I would encourage everybody to disregard your testimony. I mean, no disrespect to you, but it just, to me, a lot of the things that you're saying just don't make a lot of sense. And it is interesting that you did talk about your civil rights credentials and committees and things that you've served on, because you definitely have said things like you think it's okay to write down license plate numbers of voters.
That's not true. That's absolutely not true. Never said anything of the like.
You've said that people are playing the race card, ignoring the history of voter suppression in this country for Black and brown voters. So I just think that I just want to shed some light on the perspective of which you're coming from. My specific question is, why are you now launching such an attack against absentee voting? Because almost 500,000 voters in Georgia voting for Trump, that's a lot of votes. This is a bipartisan effort to use mail-in voting. So just tell me exactly why you're launching this.
First of all,
Mr. Adams, please do not comment any further on this. She's made her statement. That's enough. We have pending litigation. I would ask that you not respond any further to her.
Well,
please.
I understand that, but she said some things that weren't true that I said. So I feel compelled to explain. I'm not coming at this from a Republican. I'm coming at this from somebody who's watched absentee balloting for a very long time. And by the way, I was against expanded absentee balloting 5 years ago before this was a partisan issue. So that's the first response. Secondly, those things you said that I said, such as license plates, flamingly false, and defamatory.
Representative Turner has his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What you said a moment ago, you mentioned looking at the list of dead voters in Georgia. Our process here in Georgia, the Secretary of State's office has been following very closely. And even our independent activists in our community who have been critical of his performance during this have admitted that they have found 0 dead voters in Georgia. Their concerns around our voter rolls are more about people who file a change of address form, move out of the state, set up a life outside the state, and then still request a ballot here in Georgia. And they've alleged some 15,000 examples of those. And so while I would agree with you that voter rolls are a key issue in making sure that they're maintained, and there's some things that we probably need to be doing better in that regard, not probably, we absolutely must be doing better in that regard. Because you had said a couple of times you couldn't speak to this exact process in Georgia, I think it's very important that we clarify, dead people didn't vote in Georgia in this election. Potentially, there were people who cast ballots that shouldn't have, that have moved out of Georgia and their residency is no longer here. And so as to Chairman Powell's earlier question about the process of doing an audit, if we were going to start, I wouldn't say dead voters because there just aren't going to be any examples of that. Our Secretary of State pulls the records, from every county whenever there's somebody that passes away, and they immediately remove them from the voter rolls. Those reports are going monthly to our local elections officials, and so that process is key. But I do believe we need to audit to make sure that we are following it. And this committee has done a lot of work to make sure that our voting process is 100% verifiable from beginning to end, and that there's a checkpoint and there's a record at every step of the way. When you request when your application is received, the signature match is happening at that point again for the first time. The records of when the ballot was sent out, when it was received, that it was actually processed. If there were problems, we have in our state statutes things that allow the voter to cure their absentee ballot if there are problems that didn't exist 4 years ago as a result of the work of this committee, by the way. So I would just like to kind of bring to light that there are some good things that we're doing there. And if you're going to make these suggestions, I would ask that we focus on the real problem areas, because there's been a lot of misinformation out there that's cast doubt in our process. And that's one of those things where it's a red flag for me when I hear, hey, you could have dead voters voting in Georgia. Well, that doesn't happen here. And we've pulled the data to find out whether or not that did happen, and it's shown that it hasn't happened. I would just like to focus on the areas where there are actual problems, and not some of the things that could take us down a rabbit hole that will lead us ultimately to nowhere and give us a false sense of security where we should be looking at the areas where there's actually a brush fire.
Representative Nguyen had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Adams, you mentioned that your group uses a rigorous process to identify potential issues with invalid ballots. Specifically, you cited some of the issues are erroneous registrations, and you also named other instances of potentially folks casting invalid ballots for one reason or another, including double voting. I haven't had a chance to read the litigation that you did mention earlier, and I will take a look at that. But I did have a chance to read about the lawsuit that you filed in the state of Virginia alleging that invalid ballots were cast by non-citizens. In that lawsuit, Social Security numbers were shared publicly, which resulted in the commitment of your firm to redact private information, identifying information that could potentially endanger folks that are being accused of committing a felony. And subsequently, your group was sued for defamation because it was found that these voters who are alleged to be non-citizens were in fact citizens in the state of Virginia. Can you share with us how your rigorous process yielded a result that your rigorous process did not hold up for this particular case in Virginia?
Yes, thankfully that was not our rigorous process. That was the Commonwealth of Virginia's not very rigorous process. And what happened there is the Commonwealth of Virginia was removing American citizens from the voter rolls that were were actually citizens being removed as non-citizens. And so that is about as bad as a process as you can have. What we did is we asked the Commonwealth of Virginia for the list of all of the people that were declared non-citizens who had been removed from the rolls by Virginia. The Commonwealth of Virginia published that list and gave it to us. And incidentally, they are the ones who published the Social Security numbers initially, not our organization. And we took them at their word that these were people who were declared non-citizens. And it turns out, believe it or not, that the Commonwealth of Virginia, which, by the way, I apologize to all the Georgia legislators who get to hear about what goes on in other states. The Commonwealth of Virginia was declaring American citizens as non-citizens and actually canceling their voter registrations. That's something I think we all can agree should never happen. And we discovered it through this lawsuit by assuming that the Commonwealth of Virginia was acting properly. Well, it turns out they weren't. And we relied on that information and we drew reasonable inferences. If the Secretary of State of Georgia were to give you, Representative, a list of people that they canceled as aliens or foreign nationals, I think you would probably trust it also, like we did. And it turns out you can't trust everything the government does. So, but thank you for that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mr. Adams. In fact, if the Secretary of State or anybody else presented me with a list, I would absolutely not trust it. And I would go as far to say, if I were to pursue litigation, I would not take anybody's word on it. I would actually do the legwork it would require to uncover that those people were, in fact, wrongly removed before I followed lawsuit.
And you actually can't. That's part of the problem.
Defamation
and we didn't,
against
by the way, we didn't.
those people.
Let me just jump in just a second. We do have two other people that have questions. So I'm going to we're going to move to Representative Jones.
Thank you, Chairman Blackman. We appreciate your time, and I do not want to belabor too many points. I appreciate Representative Turner's focus on the NCOA process regarding the change of address. That is an area where I think we do have to be able to shore up our processes. But I want to point towards one of the solutions you talked about, and we do appreciate. It's one thing to bring problems, it's another thing to bring solutions. And your fourth solution was signature match, making sure that it's real. One of the things you did not mention was providing for or requiring an ID process within the mail-in process. Do you happen to have any type of an opinion on that, or maybe data that this committee could use?
And I actually, that's one of the things I would strongly recommend is some form of identifying number. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It could be your voter card. It could be your driver's license card. It could be a variety of things that the election officials have that you write either in your application or on your ballot to validate who you are. I'm not suggesting photocopying your driver's license. I don't think most people have the ability to photocopy at home. But something that proves who you are when you vote that mail ballot, that gives the election confidence that those are the same people. So yes, I'm very much in favor of something that is easy and doesn't have a financial burden on anybody to validate that they are who they say they are when they cast the ballot.
Okay, thank you.
And final question, Secretary Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did. Am I unmuted? I think I am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Mr. Adams, you already stated that you're not that familiar with our processes in Georgia, but I want to echo what Representative Alan Powell said, Chairman Alan Powell, getting back to the idea of doing an audit of these signature verifications. I would argue that it's relatively easy in Georgia. What both the governor's call for, almost all the members of the Republican members of the General Assembly have called for, is an audit of these signatures between the application in which they arrive and the ballots envelopes. They're held for 2 years according to Georgia law in the Board of Elections offices. And at a minimum, you could use the power of statistics and just check. And it's all about voter confidence. I opened the meeting in prayer, and all I want is the truth. And the people I represent want to know whether or not it's true. Is there fraud or not? And an audit would reveal whether or not these signatures are are matching up with legal voters or not. And I think it's a very simple ask, and it echoes again what Leader Burns is requesting of the Secretary of State's office, and that would be bipartisan teams of advisors overseeing the signature verification process every time an application comes in, and certainly when a ballot comes in. So I just want to make sure that I'm on record is absolutely in agreement that we need a verification, an audit, if you will, of the signatures in each one of the Board of Elections offices across the state. Some sort of high degree of statistical accuracy. You wouldn't have to audit 1.2 million absentee ballot signatures. But that's all I wanted to say, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for allowing me to have a say.
I got a last minute question. We've got about a minute left. Representative Oliver, do you think you can get it in there?
Yes, sir. Happy to limit myself to a minute. In listening carefully, I'm trying to differentiate these ideas that are maybe legislatively proposed later in 2021. I understand that the Republicans are building a case for legislative reform in the future, but I'm sure Mr. Adams is aware that there's an existing court order in relation to exact match signatures and various other significant procedures in relation to our existing absentee ballots. And Mr. Adams, you're not suggesting, are you, that the rules be changed in the middle of the existing election that comes before us on January 5th? I'm sure you're not suggesting a change of rules right now, because that would create enormous equal protection arguments when we have millions of people that are voting every day. Surely you're not suggesting that, or anybody is suggesting a change of the rules before January 5th.
Well, obviously I can't speak for everybody. I'll speak for myself. It is not my prerogative to time these changes. That's not what I'm here to tell you to do, is the time you do this. I'm telling you what makes sense. Now, my understanding is, notwithstanding a court order to the contrary, that you already have set these rules long ago. That these are legislative rules that were passed long ago regarding how mail ballots are counted. So I would never suggest that I advise you on timing. That's your choice. What I can tell you is that I think you've already done this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Adams, I appreciate you presenting and taking questions today. Thank you very much. We have up at 10 o'clock here. If he is ready, Mr. Brainerd, would you please, again, just start by telling us who you are and maybe a little bit of background, and then your presentation, sir.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I'm prepared with a statement to go through my background and right into my findings, if that's okay with you and the committee.
It is.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I've been working in the voter data and election administration field since 1996. I've worked building and deploying voter databases for the Republican National Committee, 5 presidential campaigns, and no less than 100 different campaigns and election-related organizations in all 50 states and the U.S. Virgin Islands. I worked for 8 years at the nation's premier redistricting and election administration firm, Election Data Services, where I worked with states and municipalities on voter databases, delineation, and litigation support related to these matters. Also, while at Election Data Services, I worked under our contract with the U.S. Census Bureau, analyzing voting age population. Since 2004, I've worked for my own business, now known as External Affairs, Inc., providing statistical and data analysis for local, state, and federal candidates and policy organizations in the areas of voter targeting, polling, research, fundraising, branding, and online development and strategy. My firm has worked for over 200 candidates from president to town council and over a dozen DC-based policy and advocacy organizations. I started the Voter Integrity Project after the November 3rd election as a volunteer endeavor to apply several methods to pivotal states to determine whether or not potentially illegal ballots have been cast and to discover other anomalies that could impact the outcome of the election. These are our findings from Georgia that I would like to share with you today. 1, from the state's database for the November 3rd, 2020 election and comparing that to the USPS owned and leased facilities report, it is my opinion that 1,043 early and absentee voters ballots were cast by voters who were registered with a postal box disguised as a residential address. For this determination, I had my staff compare the official list of leased and owned postal facilities provided by the United States Postal Service to the list of early and absentee voters' residential addresses. We identified 1,043 voters that listed postal facility as their physical address, which is contravenes the law in Georgia. In many cases, these residential addresses disguise the PO box number as an apartment or suite number. For example, apartment 5402 when it is in fact PO box 5402, etc. Second, from the state's database and the National Change of Address database and other states' voter databases, it's my opinion that at least 2,312 absentee or early voters were not residents of the state of Georgia when they cast early absentee ballots in Georgia. In conducting this analysis, I took the state's database of all absentee and early voters and matched those voters to the NCOA database. The National Change of Address database, NCOA, is maintained by the Postal Service, and the match process is actually run by the Postal Service itself. This identified 15,700 matches of voters to records who had moved out of the state, permanent NCOAs, not temporary, permanent, to the state prior to Election Day. Further, by comparing the other 49 states' voter databases to Georgia's database, I identified 4,926 voters who registered to vote in another state subsequent to the date that they registered to vote in Georgia. When merging these two lists and removing duplicates and accounting for moves that would not cause an individual to lose their residency in Georgia and eligibility to vote under state law, these voters totaled 20,312. The methodology of using NCOA to identify voters who've moved out of state is backed up by research, specifically an article titled "A Brief Yet Practical Guide to Reforming U.S. Voter Registration Systems," which appeared in Election Law Journal and was co-authored by author Stephen Anselabahari, the Frank G. Thompson Professor of Government at Harvard, who is widely published and has a PhD in political science. The article recommends the use of the National Change of Address database to identify voters who are quote unquote deadwood because they moved out of the state. From the article, it is possible to develop comparable metrics of list quality and targets for improving voter registration lists. An example of a possible metric is the incidence of deadwood, obsolete records, usually due to a person moving or dying, on active and inactive voter lists using the National Change of Address and other postal lists, information from marketing firms, past vote records, and the National Registration List. Catalyst has identified records that are deadwood. The data revealed that 7.3% of all registrations records in the United States are deadwood. The methodology for matching Georgia voters to out-of-state voters who subsequently registered to vote in another state was done using full, exact name and date of birth. For example, a Matthew Martin Brainerd and a Matthew M. Brainerd in another state, even if they had the same date of birth, would not have counted as a match for us since it's not an exact name match. Our number for this is likely much higher in reality. Both Georgia and other states, we had difficulty obtaining reliable, accurate dates of birth for all individuals, and since having a full, reliable date of birth was required for the match, there are many voters in this category that we inevitably missed. I would point out that this matching method has also been validated by published research. An article titled ADGN, an algorithm for record linkage using address, date of birth, gender, and name, in Statistics and Public Policy, another journal, also authored by Mr. Anselabahari, states the following in his analysis of a database for the state of Texas. Either name or date of birth or name and address identifies nearly all individuals in a database uniquely. 99.6% are unique with date of birth and name. I would also add that according to the official code of Georgia, section 21-2-217A2, registering to vote in another state is specifically indicated as nullifying residency in Georgia and with it, the right to vote. Number 3, it is my opinion that at least 395 individuals in the state of Georgia voted in multiple states, in Georgia and in another state. For this determination, I compared the list of early and absentee voters and compared this list to other states' early and absentee voter lists that were available through the L2 political database. Comparing these two lists by matching on full exact name and full exact birth date revealed 395 individuals who voted both in the state of Georgia and in another state, a clear violation of state and federal law. It should be noted that not all states have published complete lists of their early and absentee votes, and we didn't look at election day voters at all in either comparison. Thus, this analysis was conducted on an incomplete universe of data and represents a minimum number of individuals who voted illegally in Georgia and in another state. The accurate total figure is likely much higher. The number of matches is further reduced by the same lack of accurate and complete dates of birth, both in the Georgia file that was released publicly and in other state files that hamper the identification of subsequent out-of-state registrations. Now, I'd like to quote to you from an article in the New York Times that was published in 2012. Fraud in voting by mail is vastly more prevalent than the in-person voting fraud that has attracted far more attention, election administrators say. The flaws of absentee voting raise questions about the most elementary promise of democracy. Voting by mail is now common enough and problematic enough that election experts say there have been multiple elections in which no one can say with confidence which candidate was the deserved winner. When just combining my findings alone, the number of ballots that are strongly indicated as being illegally cast surpasses the margin of victory in the presidential election, thus making it impossible to know who the deserved winner is in Georgia. Finally, I'd like to make a point about the influence of out-of-state non-residents in your elections, because it's about more than just the outcome of this election. When someone casts a ballot, not where they live, but where they choose to cast it, they are effectively nullifying the Electoral College. Similarly, I'll ask you to recall the great compromise at the founding of this country, that we were to have two federal legislatures, one, the House, composed of representatives based on a state's population, and the other, the Senate, where each state had an equal voice. Out-of-state non-residents voting in your Senate elections also nullifies this founding principle. To the members of the committee, I am eager to answer any and every question you may have about these findings. I do respectfully request that you allow me to answer certain questions about the specifics of these findings after my testimony in current litigation, which I expect to complete within the next few days. You may email these questions to me for a written response, or I'd be happy to answer them via live, over Zoom, over the phone, and under oath. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are some questions. Mr. Brainerd, if there's something that you can speak to at present, that would be fine. We understand the ongoing litigation. If it is not something, then I would just ask that perhaps you write it down and get that answer back to us at an appropriate time. I'm going to go back. I believe the first request was from Representative Oliver. You're muted, Representative Oliver.
No, sir, I was asking for the previous witness, not this witness.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got another one up there from you. Representative Trammell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question would be for, with respect to the affidavit on compensation. It's true you're being paid a flat fee of $40,000 for your testimony?
That's what it says in the affidavit. Although to be clear, that was for another legal organization. And the campaign itself isn't paying me anything.
Who paid that $40,000?
Amistad Project. But again, the affidavit's in a case filed by the Trump campaign's legal organization.
On your Twitter bio, I see a link to a Give, Send, Go, which is a crowdsourced funding. And it says that you're raising money for the project that you're testifying about before this committee today. And to date, it's raised $674,696 that it says is going to you. Is that true?
That is the language is not quite accurate. I'll clarify some of what you said. All the money raised through crowdfunding is not going to me personally. All of it was used to fund this project. In fact, we've created an online spreadsheet detailing every expense that has been paid. Approximately 200,000 of that has been spent on data. Approximately 400,000 has been spent on call centers. And we still have invoices to log. When we reached $580,000, I posted and requested that people that were no longer asking for money, and that any money that comes in, will be dedicated to the project. I said that when we're done with the project, and we're nearing that point now where we will have no more expenses for it, we will offer anybody who donated money to return it to them because we have surplus. If there's any money that's left, sorry, go ahead. So we'll return money to anybody who asks for it, if given that we will likely have a surplus and that the project didn't cost as much as we received in donations. Any money left over after that will be given to a permanent voter registration, anti-voter fraud effort. And again, that tranche will not go to my pocket personally. It would just be going to pay for other things, but I will not benefit from it personally at all. So we stopped asking for money, and we've had a full public accounting. I'm benefiting not one penny personally from the Give, Send, Go money raised. And that's a promise I made and a promise I'm keeping. Now, attorneys have come to me and asked me to give them my expert, this is what I do for a living. I'm a campaign consultant and an expert in the area of voter data. They want me to sign affidavits, do declarations, interpret things, give them other assistance. I'm more than happy to do that, but that's what I do as a profession. All of the data that I've received, however, or that we've developed through this project has been released at no cost. I have testified at no cost to the project at hearings in Arizona. I've gone to Michigan to testify. I'm testifying to you here today without any compensation. I'm happy to do that. I've turned over data to multiple agencies, including the FBI, including your state government's leaders, your Secretary of State and Attorney General, other states' leadership. And that's been given freely. That's been funded by the public project. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, the one question I think on the updates in conjunction with the Give, Send, Go, you had 32 updates fundraising that you would post on there, and on one of them I read that the vendors you weren't disclosing at their request. Is that right?
Because of the tremendous amount of political heat around this issue, the vendors that I'm working with have specifically asked that they not be named. So we're going to provide their receipts, I guess, but with with key information cropped out, like their wire number, their account number. But I'm also intent, and this is a promise I made, that I would have somebody independent have been like, please do not put our names up there. Like we put receipts up for Chick-fil-A up there. We don't have a problem with that, or Best Buy, or the other places where we've made incidental purchases. But these major vendors whom we've given, spent basically almost all of the money on, we're very apprehensive about being publicly doxxed.
We have Representative Turner has a question.
Mr. Chairman, I have just one more question to ask, if I might.
Please go ahead.
Thanks. Mr. Brainerd, two or three nights ago, you were on an interview with Lou Dobbs on the Fox Business News channel. And in that interview, you said that you were working with Georgia legislators. Who are the Georgia legislators that you're working with?
Your colleagues on this committee who invited me to the hearing.
Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brainerd, you and I have never had any conversations, have we? We never had.
I don't recall.
Yeah,
I don't recall.
I don't think I heard your name before yesterday. As a matter of fact, I don't watch Lou Dobbs. I'm sorry I missed the interview. But and I really don't understand why it would matter who's paying you if the data can be independently verified. Have you worked with any Georgians who have given you any type of leads? Are there any activists who have come to the forefront that you're aware of, or have worked with, or have told you this is where you need to look?
No, and when other people are bringing different approaches to this, these questions, right? But it was my intent when I started this project that our findings would be geared at not Nothing that would require any speculation, only hard data that could be easily reproducible by someone else. Anybody, with just a little bit of common sense could actually do an NCOA match on the early and absentee vote. That's easily replicatable. So is the PO box leased and owned facilities. That's all easily replicatable. So we really want to avoid any kind of bias, and that you can decide how you weight certain mathematical formulas, and we didn't do any extrapolations, we did a sample size, so therefore the entire population reflects the same. We never made any of those assertions. I've given names, voter ID numbers, records to other states, etc. Just really concrete things that are I would consider actionable.
So the reason why I asked the question the way that I did was to establish that before your testimony here, I had no idea what you were going to say. And yet earlier today, when Mr. Adams was testifying, I came in to make a very specific comment, and I made a very specific claim that there were some 15,000 people who had change of address forms where their registration didn't match their current address. And that was given to me by two Georgia activists who have been doing data analysis much like yours. And so it really doesn't matter who's funding it. These two guys are doing it because as a passion project, they care about democracy, they care about their country, and they found that there are these problems in the data. And that I said the 15,000 number earlier, and I believe you put the number at 15,700. So I'd say it's in the same ballpark.
I actually hate to interrupt, but I mean, I see what you're getting at. You're trying to say that these numbers came at independently, and but there's actually a much easier way, to further validate that is that I actually have, when you run the NCOA analysis with the Postal Service, you get a receipt, and I have my receipt. If these gentlemen have their own separate receipts, well, I mean,
right.
There you go.
So, yeah. So that reinforces the point that regardless of who's looking at the data is going to say the same thing over and over and over again. And I think it would behoove this committee, especially as they go into the next legislative session, to be looking at that type of data and making sure that when we, as a legislature, give the authority to certain individuals in the legislative branch, that are actually following through with the responsibility that they've been given. One last question, Mr. Brainerd, and I do appreciate your time and flexibility in answering questions for the committee. As you mentioned that you have turned over, can you, the results of your findings to law enforcement or to the Secretary of State or other elected officials, has there been any acknowledgement of that receipt? Have you been given any indication as to what action is being taken as a result of you turning that over?
Well, I believe the only confirmation I got was the FedEx package that arrived around noon yesterday was signed for. That's the only confirmation I think I've gotten. I believe that's from the Secretary of State's office. I've sent the data to the Attorney General's office. So I've got no other acknowledgement from it.
How about to the GBI or any other law enforcement agency? I've not submitted the data to them, but if there's an agency you think in Georgia, the form letter is good to go, the data set's ready to go, it's very easy to understand. And included in all of my submissions is, the open invitation that if any of this is confusing to you or you have questions, I'm happy to answer those questions. I'm happy to help in any way I can to make it clear what these findings are. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I believe Representative Nguyen had a comment or a question.
I do have a question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Brainerd, I did have a chance to read through your affidavit and look at the exhibits that you attached to the affidavit, and you alleged that there are individuals who cast invalid ballots, and you believe the claim you're making is within a reasonable degree of scientific certainty. So I did take a look at the exhibits you attached, and I do want to share with you some of the things that I found that appear to be incorrect to me, and I'll address these in orders of the exhibit attached, and I'll just, in the interest of time, highlight the most notable things that I found. The first exhibit attached, Exhibit 2, is a list of folks who were registered to vote in Georgia and have subsequently registered to vote in another state. Right off the bat in your affidavit, you testify that you cleaned up the list for duplicate entries, yet on the very first page of the exhibit, there are 3 duplicate voters. So I am concerned about the duplicate entries that may not have been removed from the exhibits. On that same page, what I did was I just took the first 10 names that were listed that are alleged to no longer be a resident in the state of Georgia. Of those 10 names, I found 8 property tax records that shows the voter still lives at this current address listed under which they're registered in the state of Georgia. They claim homestead exemption on this home as their primary residence, and they pay property taxes on their homes here in the state of Georgia. These are 2020 records that I will be submitting to the committee for review. Of these 10 voters that I researched, I was able to reach 1 voter on the phone. The voter verified that both he and his wife still live at this address in the state of Georgia, and he has only voted in the state of Georgia. He has a lengthy voting history that I was able to pull as well. From this very same list of individuals, 1 individual is alleged to be registered in both Georgia and Arizona. I was able to confirm her registration in Georgia and match her voter registration to a property tax record to confirm that she still holds residency in the state of Georgia as her primary residence. I cross-referenced her with Arizona's database and in fact did find a voter with the exact same name, and they are exactly the same age. However, the voter in Georgia was born January 17th and the voter in Arizona was born on April 17th. The voter also has a very common name, and I subsequently just typed in her full name, first, middle, and last name. In the state of Georgia, 117 people share this name, according to White Pages, and in the state of Arizona, 54 people share this name. There was another similar scenario with another individual on that same list, registered allegedly in both Georgia and Arizona. Same first, middle, last name, but they have different birthdays. They're different ages. One is age 48, one is age 49. The voter in Arizona has not actually voted since 2016. I'm going to move ahead in the interest of time to Exhibit 4. And you mentioned this earlier, voters who, in your affidavit, you allege that voters are using P.O. boxes to register and disguise P.O. boxes as their residential address to cast invalid ballots. In this exhibit, I immediately recognize one of the addresses. It's right around the corner from which I live, and I have friends that live in this actual building. It's a condo building with units on top, and it happens to have a FedEx center in the bottom of the condo complex. I reached out to my friend that lives there and informed him that both he and his wife are listed on your exhibit as having committed voter fraud by trying to disguise their residential address as a P.O. box. He subsequently sent me a list of all the homeowners in that same complex, and I cross-referenced them with their voter registration to confirm they live there. And then I also looked on your exhibit, and every single person that owns a condo in that building that voted in this election has been accused of disguising their residency as a P.O. box. I found a similar scenario for an address that is also an apartment building with a FedEx center in the bottom of the building. I know exactly where that building is because I have friends who used to live in that apartment complex, and a simple Google search will show you in real time that that is a residential apartment building with a FedEx center underneath it. Now, for those 2 buildings alone, I've identified at least 70 individuals in the first building that are on this exhibit, having been accused of disguising their residential address as a P.O. box. And on the second list, there are at least 58 folks that are named for that specific apartment complex. In Exhibit 5, this is the list of people who have alleged to have voted twice, one in the state of Georgia and one in a second state. One of the very first names on that list happens to be our colleague, Representative Tyria Nolowitz's neighbor. So we simply picked up the phone and called Representative Nolowitz, and she called the voter. The voter is alleged to have voted in the state of Maryland and also in the state of Georgia. The individual has confirmed that he currently lives in Georgia and has never voted in the state of Maryland. He, in fact, has not been to Maryland in the last year at all. He does have a father with whom he shares the exact same name, a senior and a junior. In another scenario, I was able to find an individual who allegedly voted in Georgia and also in the state of Virginia. The voters share the exact same name and age, but they have different birthdays. The Georgia voter born June 14th, the Virginia voter born June 2nd. On that same list, I happened to notice that one of the
Representative Nguyen, excuse me, how many more on your list are
This
there?
is my last scenario. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman. On the last, one of the voters on my list happened to be my constituent. I attempted to call her, was unable to reach her. So I actually just drove over to her house and talked to her and her husband yesterday afternoon. They've lived in Georgia their entire lives, have lived in that same house since 1985. They've never even been to the state in which they're alleged to have double voted. Earlier, Mr. Adams did testify that there are circumstances in which voters have the exact same name, first, middle, and last name, and the same birthday. Based on what I found, I'm led to believe that many of the names listed on your exhibits are erroneous. And these allegations are very serious allegations. You've alleged that these voters have committed a felony. When I picked up that phone and I called my friend and let him know he was on that list, he and his wife were very surprised to learn that their names have been attached to a federal lawsuit and there have been no attempts to contact them to verify any of this information. So these voters, in fact, have no idea they're being accused of committing a crime in a public filing where both their names and their addresses are listed. And these voters are both Republican and Democrat. It's not a partisan list. So to be clear, there are many people who have been accused of committing felonies, and there are many common names in these exhibits: Smith, Williams, Johnson, Taylor, Davis, Miller. In some cases, as you admitted earlier, you use birth years, in some cases, birthdays. But did you use any more specific unique identifiers such as social security numbers or driver's license numbers that would have actually been able to prove that these people are not, in fact, the same people?
Okay, quite a lot of questions there. First of all, I actually want to thank you for helping to raise issues to help better validate the data. It's only with strong scrutiny that we're able to be completely confident in our findings. So to answer some of your questions, first, we never used anybody's just birth year. It was always had to be a complete match. In fact, because the default date for so many birth dates is the 1st of the month or the 1st of January, whenever that's those components are missing, we actually excluded everybody that was born on the 1st of the month or January 1st for any of our matching. Second, you bring up the issue of duplicates. In the total number of 20,300, is it 12, I think, that is a completely dedupe consolidation of lists. While individuals might have had multiple NCOA records, we have a completely unique list of county and voter ID numbers that totals 20,300. Regarding some of the other name issues that you've found and other issues that you've raised, as I mentioned, I'd be more than happy to address all of those. If you'd send them to me, I would give them an additional validation and scrutiny and get back to you on them.
I do have a follow-up question. As you mentioned, you said that you used complete birthdays. Where were you able to obtain those birthdays? Were they, we know that the Secretary of State here in the state of Georgia doesn't provide birthdays. Where did you get those birthdays?
Right, now you actually made a very good point. Remember, I'm a third party independent of the government. So many of the tools that would be necessary to catch a lot of the people that we think we've missed and to do further validation. Those tools reside solely in the hands of the state government. So the driver's licenses, social security numbers, what I presume would be the state probably has its own list of dates of birth that it's not releasing publicly. It's sort of set up in the scenario that only the state can definitively answer those questions. Now, in my affidavit, I don't believe I specifically accused anybody of committing a crime. I said these were indications over and over again. Potentially illegal ballots has been my language. Indications of illegally cast ballots. I've not accused anybody of committing a felony in any of my affidavits or declarations. But again, many of these tools are only available to the state, and I'd be happy to work with them and give them guidance on how to apply them, and to basically prevent illegal ballots from being cast. And I'd be more than happy to cooperate with them on that. So thank you for your questions and raising your points. And I look forward to evaluating the names you've identified and giving you feedback and updating you on that.
Thank you for that. And it is true that it is hard to obtain accurate information because a lot of this information is protected.
I didn't answer your question. Actually, dates of birth. Yeah, sorry. We have 5 different commercial date of birth vendors, each of whom has a confidence code that they use to determine the likelihood of that date of birth being accurate. We then applied our own level of scrutiny to that to do our very best to obtain what is we believe to be an accurate birth date. And I would say that in the research I cited on the uniqueness of names, dates, and dates of birth, it says that it's accurate up to 99.6. I've also in the same research found that NCOA is a valid method for identifying dead wood. So I rely on that research and the methods we have. And again, I've given this data to the state. They are the best arbiters and ultimate arbiters of it. I really just want them to give it the scrutiny it deserves. So again, I thank you for your questions.
And I do have one more final question. I'm sorry. I do have one more final question, Mr. Chair.
Representative Nguyen, we're going to move on. Representative Turner.
Thank you.
Really quickly, thank you for coming back to me. The Representative Nguyen's findings going to people's houses and knocking on doors and making phone calls. Obviously, that isn't going to happen on a wide scale, but there are ways for commercial addresses with the issue where there's a FedEx at the bottom and an apartment building at the top. There's a flag called CMRA or Commercial Mail Receiving Agencies, where a PO box is in the postal service, even if it's recorded on a voter data as being an apartment number, the CMRA is going to indicate that it's actually a PO box at the FedEx facility downstairs as opposed to an apartment upstairs. In your data, did you look at that particular flag? Was that one of the things that you looked at to determine where those folks actually lived, or if it was an actual PO box?
We used a couple of different analyses, and we also actually looked at other just commercial residences or commercial locations that would not likely be residences. But that's a question that I actually have to pull the material up and I have to talk to some of my staff that I work with on this project. So I'd be happy to answer that one subsequently.
I would look forward to that. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
All right. We're going to kind of move into a quick at ease recess for about 10 minutes, and which we'll come back and begin with the next presenter if they'd be ready a few minutes ahead of time. Mr. Smith, is that acceptable?
Yes, it would be, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Well, we'll suspend until 10:50, and then we'll get started back again.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, get back started here. I missed a message from Representative Jones. Is he back on?
Chairman Blackman, yes, I'm
Yes.
back on.
Yeah, did you have a comment or a question for our last presenter before we move on?
I do, but if it's okay, could I table that until after this speaker?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you can ask it later. I missed your message. My apologies.
No worries. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Smith, if you're ready.
Yes, Chairman.
We'll move on and to your part of the presentation, sir.
Okay. Good morning, Chairman Blackman and members of the committee. As I said earlier, I am Ray Smith. I'm the counsel, one of the counsel for the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. We are here for you all to consider the issues and problems. And there's Mayor Giuliani. He is also counsel to the President. And Mayor Giuliani, if you will, I'll present, or you want to present first, whichever.
Well, I'm all set, Ray.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
I'm all
Please. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. And Ray, thank you very much for the excellent job that you're doing for the President and for the United States. And thank you to the legislature for having the courage to have this hearing. We're quite impressed with, we know the pressures you're under, and we're very, very impressed with the way you're handling this. To me, Georgia stands out in a way and will always stand out in posterity with regard to this election, because you have the you have the thing that's going to live after this election, no matter what, and that is the videotape that proves that anyone who says that fraud is been debunked or there is no fraud is just plain blind or lying. You have live from Atlanta, you've got voter fraud right in front of people's eyes. Blatant, clear, obvious. You have to be a fool to ignore it or worse. I know the propagandists, the big tech, the big media, the crooked Democrats just say no fraud, that it's debunked. And every time you see that video, you say, what are they talking about? I mean, it's gone from the video of last week to it's gone viral all over the country. Even I get letters and texts about it from all over the world. How can they say there's no fraud? Look at that woman. Look at her taking those ballots out. Look at them scurrying around with the ballots. Nobody in the room, hiding around. They look like this. They look like they're passing out dope, not just ballots. It is quite clear they're stealing votes. And it's bad enough that the Democratic Party is covering it up. It's absolutely worse that your Republican governor, your Republican lieutenant governor, and your Republican Secretary of State persist in continuing in a cover-up of what is a crime in plain sight. In plain sight of the entire country. It's a disgrace to the people of your state. I know they're disgusted. I see the polls. It's a disgrace to our political party that we would stand by and allow this to happen when it's so obvious that it happened. I mean, there it is right in front of our faces, and they are denying it and trying to lecture us that we're pushing fraud when it's all over, when it's all over the tape. He's making fools of Georgians, he's making fools of Republicans, and the state legislature has to vindicate the honor of the state of Georgia, in particular, because your people were cheated. Every single person who cast an honest vote, whether they cast it for Donald Trump or Joseph Biden or someone else, every single one of them was cheated by what you saw in that video. And we know that's just the tip of the iceberg. And we'll get into that. You've already had testimony on it. You're going to have more testimony on it. This has to be vindicated. It isn't a matter of we want to disturb the country or we want to create phony. This is for the country now. It's way beyond Donald Trump. It's way beyond Joseph Biden. It's way beyond your governor. It's way beyond us. It's about the future of this country. Are we ever going to let this happen? If you don't stop it the first time you catch it, this is when you go down. This is when you go down. There's been so much damage done to our values in the last year. I won't go into it in detail, but you know what I'm talking about. Our value of free speech, our value of freedom of religion. They're being crushed. There's a censorship being imposed on our nation that's unheard of. If you say the word fraud, they take you off YouTube. You say the word fraud, you can show pictures of fraud. You have 1,000 people admitting fraud, or we have 1,000 people on tape admitting fraud. It's not untrue. It's true. In a country like ours, you have a right to speak. You even have the right to speak things that aren't true, much less the truth. What are we letting happen to ourselves? Somebody's got to stand up. And we're looking to the brave, brave people of Georgia, the brave Republicans and Democrats of Georgia, who stand up for the truth, not just, one particular corrupt group. So I would ask that we take one quick review and one look at that tape again, very briefly, that happened on the night that the Democratic officials made sure that they first got rid of all the reporters, all the observers, anyone that couldn't be trusted. They even used a phony excuse that there was a water main break and cleared out the voting area and then went about their dirty, crooked business. And I should tell you, similar things were happening in 4 other places in Democratic strongholds throughout the country, which only goes to prove how concerted this fraud was. Very similar things in Philadelphia, very similar things in Detroit, very similar things in Maricopa County. So if we could just take a look quickly at that tape so we're reminded of it, we can do away with this. Fraud has been debunked. I hope we have
Mayor,
that
what
ready.
time would you like to look at it?
Just the excerpts where we show the things being pulled out from under the drawer.
Okay.
It'll be like 11 o'clock.
It will be.
We only need a minute or two of it for people to be reminded of it. Ray, maybe you could walk us through it if you have it there.
Sure, we can do that.
Sure. Okay, so as you can see in the upper left-hand corner of the screen, this is about 11:01 p.m. on November 3rd. This is election night in Fulton County at the State Farm Arena. What you see toward the back are the tables that contain the scanners for the absentee ballots. You see at least 5 individuals back there. This is after the press has gone, the Republican observers are gone, the people who are separating the ballots from the envelopes are gone. So these are the only people left behind. At about this time, which is about a half an hour after everyone else cleared out, I believe the workers cleared out at about 10:30, the observers cleared out closer to 10:40, you're going to watch each of these individuals begin pulling cases out from under that black table in the lower center of the screen.
Unbelievable.
This happens between 11 and 11:07. So give him just a second. Here we go. So one by one, they'll be there. And so, you know, according to the Georgia statute 21-483B, all of this has to be open to the public. That means the press, it means Republican observers. They cannot do proceedings behind closed doors. Proceedings means counting, for example. If they're going to restart the count, then under Georgia statute, it's 21-493, the superintendent has to give due notice of when the tabulations process will publicly commence. And this due notice has to be continued from day to day until the vote is completed. Again, that's 2 separate Georgia laws that are clearly being violated here. And I'm sorry I'm yelling. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm not sure where the microphone is.
We can hear you.
Okay.
Talking about the pressure.
Okay. So according to our affidavits, our observers left because there was an announcement by the lady in the blonde braids and also by a spokesperson for the Fulton County Board of Elections that they had stopped counting for the night. And therefore, the press packed up and everyone left. Well, later, the chief investigative officer for the Secretary of State told the press there was no announcement that counting had stopped. In fact, checking sites reported that to be true, when in fact, a simple Google search would have shown that the spokesperson told ABC, NBC, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and others that they were stopping counting for the night. The press was standing by our observers. This is why they all left. So the press reports contradict the press reports of the words of the chief investigative officer. Also, the chief investigative officer said that the observers could have stayed if they wanted to. In fact, under Georgia law, they only have the right to be present during proceedings. They do not get to stay after hours and stand guard over the ballots. They would be trespassing at that point. They do not have the right to be present after the counting stops. So they had no choice but to leave. And they asked the spokesperson 3 times before they left to confirm the status of the ballot count. She refused to answer, just as she refused to answer the Atlanta Journal-Constitution when asked, "Why are you stopping?" And in fact, there were contradictory reports to ABC News and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. In one instance, she said, "We're going to stop counting as planned." And in a different instance, she said, "We'll continue counting the ballots on Tuesday night and try to finish." So there are contradictory statements coming from the spokesperson in the press that night, and also contradictory statements coming from inside the Secretary of State's office.
Jacqueline? This is Rudy Giuliani.
Yes, sir.
So I think we've covered. That we could look at plenty of this, but I think we've covered the obvious. The 4 of them handing out the ballots, putting them in the back, counting the ballots. I guess the estimate that I recall is something like, depending on how many times, it would be anywhere from 12 to 24,000 ballots that were counted in that short period of time. Could have been more if they were double and triple counting it, which we're going to show later. And all of this illegal. Those votes have to be discounted, taken out, removed. And that alone is enough to change the result of the election, which puts the lie to those people who were saying there was no fraud in Georgia. The important thing to note, so you're not isolated just in Georgia, is that around approximately that same time in Philadelphia, they closed down. Maybe a few minutes earlier, a few minutes later. They decided prematurely, we're not going to go on with counting anymore. Biden had fallen behind by 800,000 votes. The Democrats in crooked Philadelphia were panicked. They're used to making up crooked votes, but not 800,000. They didn't know how they were going to do it, so they had to close down the center. And then all of a sudden, they got rid of everybody. And lo and behold, we see all of a sudden a quick 140,000 votes pumped in, vast majority of which turned out to be all for Biden. And then all throughout the night, they're pumping it in. And then they had to do that for 2 or 3 more nights because they were so far behind in Pennsylvania. The statistical chance of Biden winning Pennsylvania at the point that he was on Tuesday night was something like 0.0000, I don't know, it's like 15 zeros before you get to a 1, meaning it was impossible to make up the 800,000 votes unless you did precisely what they have done for 60 years in a row in Philadelphia, which is to commit voter fraud. Not unusual for Philadelphia, but it happened at approximately the same time you see this cheating going on in Atlanta. In Detroit, a very similar thing happened. They decided that it was getting too late. Everybody was hungry. Everybody should take off. Everybody should go home. And they shooed everybody out of the center where they were counting votes. Fortunately for us, 2 Republican workers either didn't get the word, were somewhere else when they were being shooed out, or didn't go, weren't recognized particularly as Republicans, and hung around. And one very, very brave Dominion employee who at that point had become disgusted with the illegal activities of Dominion was also around. And what they observed was somewhere around 4 o'clock in the morning, they heard big noise in the back. They saw trucks, not ballot trucks. It looked like food trucks or possibly garbage trucks were pulling up. They were very hungry. They ran to the back. All of a sudden, what do they see coming out of the trucks? Ballot after ballot after ballot after ballot after ballot, not in the usual official seals that they're in, sticking out of things, some of them in waste paper baskets, some of them in some of them in cardboard boxes. They were shoved on a table. Everybody kind of shooed away, and they started furiously counting, almost without regard, actually without regard to looking at the outer envelope. Some of them didn't have outer envelopes. Some didn't have inner envelopes, meaning the sealing envelope. They were just being ripped out, tossed off. Every once in a while, a ballot was taken and thrown away. Presumably, they believed a Trump ballot because in the calling out of the names of the ballots as they were recording them, they never heard Trump's name once over a 4-hour period. They also observed what I was mentioning before, in some cases, triple, quadruple entry of the ballot. In other words, they take one ballot, they look at it, they put it in the machine, and then they go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. Now, that's accounted for because there are something like, well, in Pennsylvania, there are something like 700,000 more ballots, I believe, or rather in Michigan, there are 700,000 more ballots counted than was sent out, which would be accounted for by quadruple counting ballots. So, and that's similar on a smaller scale situation went on in Maricopa County and several other places. So this was a national call by the Democratic Party that we better catch up because Trump's getting too far ahead. There in Georgia, you were getting down to 85% of the vote counted, and he was on his way to winning. In Pennsylvania, he was getting so far ahead, it was impossible to catch up. In Michigan, he was so far ahead, it was almost impossible to catch up. I should also mention Wisconsin. He was ahead in all those states. He was ahead in all those states by numbers where those states normally would be called for a candidate, but because the media was part of the cover up here, and we know it is, it wasn't done. This is a horrible crime that's been committed against the American people. Georgia has probably the piece of the most dramatic evidence. You don't have the most cheating. You didn't have to cheat as much. I mean, the margin was only 10,000. The most cheating obviously occurred in the places where they had to make up the most votes, in Pennsylvania and in Michigan. But what does it matter what the level of cheating? Any cheating in an American presidential election is an attack on our democracy, an attack on our country. It's an attack on all of us. It's an attack on the men and women who died for this country. It's an attack on the men and women who fought and created this country. It's an attack on the men and women who come here and risk their lives to come to the greatest nation on earth. Because we let this happen. We let this erosion of our free speech take place. We let the erosion of our freedom of religion take place. Now we let them take away our free vote. Are we America anymore? That's up to you. It's up to you. And unfortunately, your governor doesn't seem to understand what's at stake here. Just the opposite. I'd also like to focus on the two people that are involved in this because I spent most of my life as a United States attorney and associate attorney general and a criminal prosecutor. And I've prosecuted, I think, some of the worst criminals of the last century. People shouldn't get away with this. I'm not sure I know the names of these people. I think I do. I think the woman in charge here is named Ruby Freeman. And I think her daughter, Shay Freeman Moss, either was helping her here or helping her earlier. Because earlier in the day, these two were engaged in another apparent voter fraud in which they were passing out USB ports, which were being used apparently, to infiltrate the crooked Dominion voting machines and get data out of it or change data in it. Or do you have a video of that we can show? Just want to show you, we're talking here about multiple offenders. And I ask, has anybody subpoenaed these people? Has anybody subpoenaed these people? I mean, this is a week ago now. Gosh, I remember a couple of years ago, a lawyer for President Donald Trump, his house and his law office raided at 4 a.m. Well, I think actually I'll have Phil show that because he has the right. He has the exact right one, but it's a tape earlier in the day of Ruby Freeman and Shay Freeman Moss and one other gentleman, quite obviously, surreptitiously passing around USB ports as if they're vials of heroin or cocaine. I mean, it's obvious to anyone who's a criminal investigator or prosecutor, they are engaged in surreptitious illegal activity again that day. And after a week ago, and they're still walking around Georgia lying. They should have been questioned already. Their places of work, their homes should have been searched for evidence of ballots, for evidence of USB ports, for evidence of voter fraud, because they obviously were engaged in it, and it's available to 300 million Americans to watch. Someday somebody's going to say, what the hell did you do about it? Don't you want to protect us, your posterity? Don't you feel any responsibility for the enforcement of the law? I mean, are you so cowed by the American media, the America big tech, the America big mouths, and the America big left that you perspire too much to do your duty? I am so disappointed. Not in what these crooks did. I've seen this coming, and I've watched the Democrat Party since Bill Clinton at the very top deteriorated to a crooked political machine. Not the regular Democrats, not the good people of the Democratic Party. They're very, very decent people. They deserve better than this. But they've been taken over by a cabal of very, very crooked people. And unfortunately, they're protected. And we're demonized for doing the right thing. And unfortunately, it's starting to get to us. And some of us don't seem to have the courage to react to it. And if we don't, maybe we're not up to what our ancestors were. Because we have to fight for this. This is clearly voter fraud. They can take it off internet all they want. They can scratch it away all they want. They can try to erase that video, but we have it. And they can try to erase 1,000 affidavits, but we have them too. We have the brave people who are standing up to it, some of whom are being threatened, but they're still standing up to it. So there are so many more indications of fraud in Georgia. I'll mention one other, and then I'll turn it over to Phil Waldron, who's done such a good job, first of examining the Dominion machines, which he's becoming more and more expert on, but also in going through these statistics and getting them up to exactly the precise statistics. The one that jumps out at me that just tells me that you cannot possibly certify Georgia in good faith without submitting a clearly false statement to the United States government, which, by the way, is a federal crime, is the voter records of your county show that 96,600 mail-in ballots were voted. Yet the records don't show that those votes were ever received back. That's an astounding delta. It makes the point that you have all kinds of unaccountable ballots. We don't even need to know the reasons for that to know that those votes should be taken away. And in the case of the votes in that center, the votes should clearly be taken away from the Democrat Party, because the Democrat Party was in complete control of that center. Every single vote should be taken away from Biden. The minute that happens, Trump wins the state by a nice, healthy margin, which is what he probably won it by in the first place. Just like he won Pennsylvania, probably 300,000 or 400,000 votes that they stole. This is a theft that took place right in front of our eyes. And too many of us have been cowered into being afraid to speak up. And I think it's stopping. I think you're seeing a reaction throughout the country with the brave action of Texas, of the state of Texas, and now 17 other states standing with them, saying it is clear that this was a theft of an American presidency, not just a theft of an election. And it's not just Georgia. Please don't feel alone. You were taken advantage of, just like other states were. And by the way, had it been a swing state, it certainly would have happened in my state of New York, probably bigger than in Georgia. So I'm not trying to act holier than thou. We got plenty of crooked Democrats in New York that could certainly match and outshine yours. So I want to thank again our counsel in Georgia. They've been among the best that we've had to work with. They've been among the most effective. They uncovered and found most of this. I want to thank Phil because he's been doing this all over the country. And now I'd like to turn it over to the Colonel, okay? And thank you very much for your indulgence.
Good morning, sir. I think Russ Ramsland was going to review the data and the affidavits first.
Fine with me. He's as good as you are, Phil.
I think Camille, if you could put Russ up. Russ, I think you're muted still.
Okay, am I unmuted now? Am I unmuted now?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Because the first part of my affidavit has to do with what I call the background or atmospherics, let me just run through it real quick. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. I know your time's important. But we got involved in this because we saw some logs out of Dallas in 2018, and my cyber guys were totally horrified at what they saw. We didn't really set out to look at the voting system, but we just felt like we had to based on what we saw. So we started looking into it, and what we found is that the election system is not well understood. More than that, in a lot of cases at the federal level, it's ignored. Some of it may be willful. Some of it may simply be ignorance. I don't know, and I'm not judging. But it's a complex patchwork. There are lots of people who are involved in this, including foreign-owned companies with servers outside this country. And there aren't really any hard standards. There are voluntary standards. Actually, they're called guidelines. And as a result, guidelines are pretty loosey-goosey. And so a lot of these voting companies say that they're in compliance with all guidelines, but they've defined their interpretation of what the guidelines are, since it's all entirely voluntary. And most SOS people do not know what the whole voting system looks like. And we found an incredible number of places where this thing can be injected. And so let me see if I can show you a little about that. This is actually what the voting system looks like at a high level. And can you see my whole screen, or on mine, I'm seeing some of this. Let me just do that. Yeah, that's better on mine. This is where you and I vote. This is your county, where central counting, tabulation, etc., with poll books, with databases, with tabulation software, reporting software, and with Dominion and ES&S and even HART, there's an unofficial database and an official database. And the general story is, well, this whole thing is air gap because this isn't connected here, but it is. And it's air gap because these two are not connected, but they are. And you can see that they are because they both are behind the same firewall. So guys like mine can go in, and if they can get to this unofficial database, and you're going to see there's a bunch of ways to do it, they can also change these numbers. So how do things get changed? Well, let's talk about that. At the voting place, and we'll get to that at the very end of my deal here, you have what I call zealots, and these are people who decide that they want to vote ballots for people who may or may not really have shown up to vote. because they're in the database and they know they generally don't vote. It can be in the form of fake ballots. It can be in the form, as you're going to see in a minute, of blank ballots that get voted, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots of ways that zealots, if you would, at the voting place can change things. The next way that people can change things is directly at Central County. And that can be a number of ways. This entire system is online with all these systems, which also are in the cloud. And anyone who would like to take the results from here that come into here and change them can then backload them right down into here. So when we see these big vote spikes, that's one particular possible culprit, is outside actors here who are backloading. As I said in my affidavit, we see in a number of these, particularly in CITL, we see what's called Q-snatch malware. And that's malware that basically allows these actors to collect all the credentials from all these counties so that they can go back and get into these databases. And that's outlined in my affidavit. So that's another point of vulnerability. Another point of vulnerability simply comes from these guys right here, who can, for instance, set up the algorithm we're going to give you some proof of in a minute. And the algorithm can change the votes that are being tabulated here. They can switch votes. They can move votes from election day votes to absentee votes. They can add and subtract. And you've had some software updates that were not evidently particularly scrutinized, and that's a real problem. So that can happen at that level. The next place things can happen is, as I said before, they can tamper with these databases here or here and backload votes in here. So as you can see, there's just a huge number of places, attack surfaces is what my guys would call it, for people who want to cheat in this system. It is an incredibly, incredibly insecure system. I talked a little bit about an affidavit by a guy named Spider. Let me just show you real quick, for instance, how we traced that CITL actually had servers in Frankfurt right up until the raid about 2 weeks ago. You can take a tool called NS Lookup and look that up, and it will tell you that this is its IP address. And 5.2 right away is set up for Germany, but in this day, it could also have been migrated elsewhere. So at that point, we do what's called a geo, an NS lookup, and sure enough, it says, no, it is over in the EU. We can do what's called a geo IP lookup, and that will tell you that it's in Frankfurt. So the kind of tools that Spider talks about are very well known. They're what's called white hat tools, and those are guys that are computer specialists. You might call them hackers, although that's sort of a pejorative term, except white hat hackers are guys that obey the laws and the rules. And so all of our research was done using white hat hacker techniques. And these are just other tools that you can use to pin it down. For instance, this tells you that it's also in the Amazon cloud, as I talked about in my last one. A lot of people don't understand that they actually are connected to Clarity Elections. If you're on ES&S or Dominion, the people in Kentucky didn't. We went out there to meet with them. And the first thing we told them is look on your Kentucky State Board of Elections website, click on your unofficial votes. And they said, okay, fine, we're on Kentucky State Board of Elections. I said, no, you're not. Look up here. This is really where you are. You're at Clarity Elections. And that Clarity Elections server at the time was in Frankfurt, Germany. That's where the votes ultimately were being held. And you can change them at that level and backload them all the way back into counties in Kentucky or, in your case, Georgia. All right, that's enough about that part of it. it's important to understand at a very high level sort of how the Dominion system works. It really has two buckets. I'm going to call them the regular bucket and the adjudication bucket. And a lady named Missy, I forget her last name, but we've got the video here. She demonstrated this beautifully, where if votes go into the regular bucket, they're treated one way. But if you put them into the adjudication bucket, you can, the operator can pretty much do anything they want at their discretion, or they can apply the ranked choice voting algorithm. And so it's at its discretion. And in some cases, for instance, I don't know if Georgia has allowed this, but I know Arizona has allowed adjudication to be pre-programmed ahead of time with such commands as 90% of all adjudicated ballots shall be cast for XYZ regardless. Now, it's important to think about these two buckets, because if you've got an algorithm, and we do, and we're going to show you that, it takes the votes and it just puts them in one place or another. It's not actually counting whole votes. It is taking the votes and it's apportioning them out. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But it's important to know that adjudication can be manual at the operator's discretion or at an algorithm's discretion. Very important to understand that. In any case, it has nothing to do.
Hey, Russ, could you jump to the specific numbers for Georgia that they're looking at?
Are you looking at this one?
Correct.
Okay.
And then the voting numbers.
All right. These are in my original affidavit, we were looking, it was early days, and we were only looking at the number of voting records where the vote was cast, and yet there was no record that it had ever been returned or received. Since that time, there's been a lot of work done by some guys that we've worked with, and they've been able to identify a whole host of problems. And they've done that using Secretary of State records. They were dated 10-4. Those were the latest ones. They've cross-referenced some of these things with, for instance, ERIC, which is the Electronic Registration and Information Center, or the National Change of Address Database, or the DPS database. So over here is sort of what they used in order to determine these things. And they found that on the Secretary of State record, there's about 66,247 mail-in ballots that apparently are being cast by underage voters. They found 2,506 voters on the registered felons list. 2,423 were not listed as registered to vote, and yet they still got to vote. We had the same problem here in Dallas. We found 4,926 that were registered to vote in another state, 395 that actually cast votes in another state. 15,700 of them had done a national change of address to another state and yet still show as having voted in Georgia. 40,279 had moved across county lines 30 days prior or more to the election. That actually requires them to re-register in their new county. That did not happen with 40,279, and they still voted. 1,043 used illegal post-off boxes as residences. 98 registered too late. 10,315 were deceased by election day. 8,718 perished prior to the vote being counted. 305,000 ballot by mail app was submitted too early. It was submitted 180 days, more than 180 days. 13 was sent to unregistered voters. 2,664 were by mail app, mailed too early by the Secretary of State records. 50 of them were voted too early, and 217 of them were requested, issued, and voted all the same day. All in all, This is a total of a stunning 461,349 total potential illegal votes. Now, I'm sure that the deeper and longer you have to look into this, you'll find that some of these are overlapping into one or more of these categories. But the point is, it is an absolutely incredible number of illegal votes that were being done under this watch. In terms of the scale of the negligence or the fraud, well, let me put this in perspective. In 2020, there were 1,768,000 mail-in ballots that were sent out. If you look down in 2018, that number was 234,000. If you look down in 2016, that number is 208,000. So you've got 5 to 6 times as many mail-in ballots in this election. And yet look what happened for the ones that were returned as rejected. And what this really goes to, it goes to the fact that an incredibly, stunningly bad job was done in actually checking these ballots to make sure that they were legit. Only 4,400 of 1,768,000 mailed out and 1,300,000 returned were actually rejected. That's a rejection rate of 0.34%, 1/3 of 1%. In 2018, where you had only 234,000 mail-in ballots returned, 7,889 of them were rejected. So with 5.61 more, fewer ballots, you had a 3.36 rejection rate, or twice as many. So you can look at these numbers and you can get a pretty good idea as to the scale of what went on.
Thanks, Russ. I'll take over the screen real quickly and select window. All right, and we'll hit 2 quick numbers real quick, and hopefully you can see my screen. Just two of the top level analytics indicators that you're probably familiar with. We mentioned it at the Senate hearing last week, but in the morning hours, about 1:36 in the morning of November the 4th, there was about a 200,000 vote batch that was the largest batch in the Georgia 2020 general election. And about 80% of those votes went to former Vice President Biden. And we've got those broken down by the precincts where those votes went in. And this information, I believe, has been provided to you. If not, it will be. But those lists of precincts where that batch of votes went in at 01:36 in the morning represented the time after the stop of the shutdown, and it actually coincided with the timing of the video that was produced from a Fulton County at the arena. There's one more. There's a lot of statistical analysis here, but one more thing that I did want to show you that indicates some potential fraudulent batch files that were injected into the voting. And apologize, but I'm going through this for the sake of time. This was with the Edison update. The batches that were across here, and I've got a graphic to show you. The graphic across there represents a pretty flat number of even numbered additions to the race. And I'll provide that, but basically they were batches that were uploaded in batches of 1,000. of hundreds, and they were straight numbers, which would indicate that they were loaded in as batch files. Mr. Ramsland indicated the Democracy Suite Users Guide, and I believe you've all been provided this, but some of the things that you've been told that these were not connected to the internet. All you have to do is look in this. Chapter 5 basically talks about opening an election project, and I'll scroll down here. There are several different areas where connecting these systems to the internet are mentioned. Chapter 5 being the first place. Opening an election project. If you're creating a project for the first time, enter the network parameters. Enter all the data required: the EMS applications, the server host, the IP address and name, the name of the EMS. This is the communication ports in the system. Further down on chapter 6. Resetting removable medium, loading results from the directory, results loading, and 6.5. Sorry, I'm scrolling there, but this talks about how the RTR, the results tabulating machine, can automatically load results from 2 predefined locations. The results directory from central scanning, and they uploaded results directory. So these are all pathways in the network, how these items communicate. And I can go on and on in chapter 13 about defining transfer points and exporting results. Chapter 14, the results tabulating devices have an exposed surface to which remote clients can communicate. And then as recently as last week at the Senate hearing, one of your election supervisors had an issue that couldn't be resolved. The poll pads as well as the tabulators were coded for the wrong voting location. She was able to call Colorado. They remoted into her poll pads and her tabulating devices and changed the polling precincts. So from the beginning, the fallacy that these are air gapped, that these are not connected to the internet, is false. And I would just submit to you, I've got a list of things if you'd like to look through the operator's manual on how these systems are manipulated. There's a lot more that we could go through in the operator's manual, but if you'd indulge me, I'd like to show you a video from Fulton County. I'm sorry, Coffee County, Georgia, with one of your own.
I'd just like to jump in here real quick. When we show any video, I want to remind everybody, committee and presenters, that we don't need to use names, please.
Okay, I believe the lady in this video is self-identified, but we can disregard that. So, okay.
Do you see this to run? Or is this Ruby? There's my ballot.
Is there supposed to be audio here?
I'm sorry, is there no audio coming through?
There is no audio coming through.
Can I get the, Camille, could I send the URL to you and play it from your end? There's audio on this end.
Somehow I feel encouraged. This is really good stuff.
I'll put the link into the moderator, and hopefully she can play from that end and maybe have audio.
Call Jason after this. We should try to get this on Newsmax, on IAN.
Yeah.
And on
You send it to Camille, we can get it.
Unshare and then reshare.
Yeah, I just sent it to Camille.
The hearings in Georgia today.
We need to. Mr. Smith, are we going to be able to get that, do you think, or are we, I think there's interest.
What do you need the video coffee?
The
YouTube link.
If you could send somebody could send the YouTube video to our video guy here, he can do it.
Would you like me to? I could put it in the chat.
We've got video services is now telling me that they will play it.
Okay.
Somebody's didn't go through. Well, when you look at it, it's tore, so we're going to set it to the side because we're going to have to look at it with the review panel. Okay? So now in the ICC system, I'm going to tell it whether I want to discard the whole batch or I want to accept the batch. So I don't see anything wrong with what went through, so I'm automatically going to accept it. All right? So it just told me that I have scanned a total of 16 ballots, but there's really 14 because I did 2 before y'all all got in here to play with it. Okay, so now I'm going over to the RTR system to see if I can find my ballots. Well, here are the ballots that just come through for batch number 3, and it's telling me that they're in adjudication. Adjudication is where I can go. There's my ballots for batch 3. Let me make sure that's them. So I'm gonna tell it to refresh, because it should be a fourth ballot. I mean fourth batch, not third batch. So it takes it a few minutes to get over here. There it is. Okay. So now it should be in adjudication. There's my fourth batch. For some reason, every one of those, it sent them through. Every one of those. So, did anybody overvote their ballot?
Nope.
Nope. Nobody overvoted?
I didn't.
You did not?
Did not.
Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to take and we're going to overvote.
Who shot this video?
And why not? Let's just do, you know, a star.
And overvote. What do you mean by overvote?
Overvote is when if there is
You vote for multiple parties.
multiple people in a section where it says only vote for one.
Okay.
So now this is a new batch of ballots that's come in. We're going to scan them again. We're going to scan the second batch.
So you're scanning the same ballots twice. It's already been scanned once.
I've already scanned them once.
Yeah, so you're scanning the same
Same ballots twice.
So it'll scan the same ballots two
Twice.
times. Okay.
And I went and remarked them. So here they go. It just accepted every one of them. Every one of them went through the system. So I'm going to say, okay, yeah, I want to accept them. It doesn't show me that anything really went wrong with it. So now we're going to go back over to RTR and let's see and wait on them to come through. Because normally I don't do the adjudication until all ballots have been ran. So it's already sitting there for me.
So you should have 5 batches of ballots.
Right.
When these upload.
Yeah, when these uploads, I will have 5. There it is, the 5th batch.
Okay.
It's pending adjudication.
Sure.
So that means there's something that needed to go to adjudication.
Uh-huh.
So now I'm going to go to adjudication. There's my, it hadn't pulled over. There's my batch. I want to adjudicate it right here. This is one that I did right before y'all got here. So we're going to go and say we're going to complete this one just like it is. But if you look, here is a vote that is double voted. It's overvoted. I don't know if when I hit complete, is it going to accept a vote for both both candidates? Or is it, since there's a red box around it, is it going to reject it altogether? I don't know. So I'm going to say it's complete. I could also say hide the box. The box went away. There's a check mark. Did it accept the check mark? I don't know. But I'm going to say nothing needs to be changed. Okay?
Does it tell you what it does after you
No, sir.
hit complete?
No, sir. I'm going to say, I want to take it. No, wait just a minute. I want to go and I think I want to vote for Jason Shaw. They didn't vote that ballot a while ago. There wasn't nothing there. I think we need to vote for him. And I'm going to complete it. Confirm ballot save, move to next ballot. Okay. So it pulls up the next ballot that needs to be adjudicated.
So you made a vote for someone where someone did not vote.
I did, didn't I?
And you're the election supervisor?
I'm the election supervisor. I am the person that sits and does the adjudication. Yes, sir?
Go back to the Trump and Biden race and decide, since both are marked, you just count one of them and not count the other.
Let's see. Yep, sure can. I think I want to vote for Biden. Let's let Biden win this one.
Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in with Brightside Broadcasting. We are live out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania at the March for Trump bus tour. We're in the final stretch the last 3 days. So today we're in Pittsburgh, tomorrow we will be in Harrisburg, and then Saturday we will be in Washington, D.C. with 2 million other patriots to fight for the president. He has been going through a lot with this election and the litigation and trying to sort out the election and everything that is going on right now. And Pennsylvania is at the center of all of this. As you guys know, it is very contested here. I'm calling it an election war zone in Pennsylvania because when we were rallying here, I used to talk about how the GOP would register, or they did register, 7 times more voters than the Democrats did since 2016. And that's amazing. So they gained about 200,000 more GOP voters. So for the president to lose the state of Pennsylvania is pretty unbelievable to me. So we will see what happens in this state, and hopefully we are able to flip it. And here's Mike.
Thank you, Grace. It's a beautiful day here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We're happy to be here. Thank you for everyone tuning in today on Right Side Broadcasting. We are streaming on Facebook as well as YouTube, but we're also trying a new thing today. We are streaming on Pure Social. So I don't know if the moderators have put that in the chat or how we blasted it out, but if you do have Pure Social, you can watch this broadcast on there, and I believe we'll be using that going forward. But thanks to everyone that's tuning in. I also want to give a special shout out to our partner for the day, MyPillow. We know that getting a restful night's sleep is crucial to waking up on the right side of the bed, and with Christmas right around the corner.
Mr. Waldron, does it continue?
I believe she's going to show 2 more things. She's going to show how to vote a blank ballot.
And we're going to shut the door to the Jim's room.
That's an up close view.
We're trying to see the screen. We're trying to see what Misty's doing through a window that looks into her office in the Jim's room. And I can't tell. I'm probably around 7-8 feet max from the screen, and I can't tell what she's doing. Can any of you board members see what Misty's doing?
No. Not accurately.
Okay, so we're all in agreement that while we've stepped out of the Jim's room, that there could possibly be some fraud going on behind our back that we have no clue of. Okay. What are you doing in here?
I'm just voting. I'm doing the adjudication. Okay, now I've ran a batch of ballots. I'm gonna do it again. I'm gonna cancel it so y'all can see it. I'm scanning a batch of ballots. Oh, scanner's timing itself out. Wow. Exception found. 4th ballot scanned. Misread ballot, or ballot misread. Last 4 ballots did not count.
So how do you?
So you take it and you go 1, 2, 3, 4, or you say, you can say view the ballot and it's going to show me which one, and then I can go through and find it. Or, as I do, I say discard whole batch.
But you could hand pick the ballot that you wanted to come out of that stack.
Uh-huh.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. So I'm going to say discard the whole batch, and then I'm going to take the ones that went through that it's told me it stopped on, and I'm going to take them and set them aside, and then I'm going to rescan the rest of the batch that was scanning. And while that is scanning, I'm going to be going through these ballots, looking to see if I can see why one, oh, there's one. The barcodes, the scanner, the notches wasn't all the way.
Or the scanner could have told me.
So, one more thing is what I want to show you. And this is one that totally bothers me. There is nothing voted on this ballot. Everybody agree? It's a 100% blank ballot. I can go over here and tell it to stop adjudication, and I can tell it to scan and adjudicate all ballots. I can go and vote that blank ballot.
Oh, wow.
Show us.
Oh, no. It's just flaw after flaw. Misty, can you scan a ballot more than once?
I've just done it.
I'm talking about you just,
Yeah.
you just keep scanning them if you want.
I just kept scanning the
Something you
same.
like, you just keep sending them.
I just scanned the same batches that y'all just voted. I never got any more until that
I
one.
don't know why they approve such a system. I don't get it.
So see, as I have it right now, I have it to do ambiguous mark and overvotes. It's supposed to do blank ballots. So let's see if it does the blank ballots like it's supposed to. Let's see. It scanned it. I'm going to accept it into the system, and now let's see if it goes over for adjudication. Or and these red lines show me that these batches were adjudicated, that I touched those ballots, that someone touched those ballots, but it does not know that I, Misty Martin, touched those ballots.
So they can be tracked which ones were adjudicated.
It can be tracked, but it cannot be tracked to exactly what ballot it was.
It can be tracked, but it can't be traced.
Right. So, okay, it sent it to adjudication. And there's my batch, my blank ballot that I want to adjudicate. And I'm going to vote for Doug Collins. I'm going to vote for Bubba. And I am going to complete it. And I just counted that vote.
Holy cow. It works fine for honest people.
Yeah.
If you intend to be honest, it works fine.
Say that one more time.
I said it works fine for honest people. Those who intend to do wrong, though, certainly can.
That's right. All right, I'm cutting it off.
So I apologize for the link, but I believe that the points that we made last Friday to the Senate, that the system was designed to be manipulated. It's got workarounds in the software that can be manipulated. I'd just like to share one more thing. Oh, sorry.
Mr. Smith, we're very short on time.
Will do. So the National Conference of State Legislatures, I believe Georgia is a member of that, has adopted the voting system standards. And this is quite a lengthy document, but the Federal Election Commission voluntary voting system guidelines. I do believe, according to the NCSL, that the state of Georgia has mandated compliance with the federal requirements. The biggest piece of compliance is that voting systems are not able to be manipulated, that a vote shall be represented with the intent of the voter. And this is chapter 2.11 of the voting system standards, security and accuracy. And this is their declarative statements. To ensure vote accuracy, all systems shall, record the election contest candidates and issues exactly as defined by election officials, record the appropriate options for casting and recording votes, record each vote precisely as indicated by the voter, and produce an accurate report of all votes cast. So in the integrity part, it says that the integrity measures ensure the physical stability and function of the vote recording and counting processes. All systems shall protect against any attempt at improper data entry or retrieval. And I think your own voting officials there in Georgia have just shown that those processes are not possible with the Dominion voting system. So if your own legislature mandated compliance with the voting system standards, based on what you've seen, the ability to change the vote of a Georgia citizen, the ability to negate the vote of a Georgia citizen by voting and accepting a blank ballot, the ability to disenfranchise Georgia citizens by the ability to run ballots through multiple times, it really all underscores the conclusion that you can't certify this election with any degree of certainty that the will of the people of Georgia is accurately represented in this vote. Now, we have developed new technology and new capability to scan the ballot images electronically and determine which of the ballots are fraudulent. Now, machine marked ballots, like the lady did there in Georgia, they're really hard to, that's going to be hard to detect. And you're really weighing in on the individual honesty of the operators or malign actors who gain access to that system illegally or unlawfully. So there are a lot of vulnerabilities. There are ways to at least validate and pull out mail-in ballots that are inaccurate. Those are scanned in, is called part of the scanned ballot image. And the cast vote record is an export function of the Dominion system. So with the cast vote record and the scanned electronic ballot images, the results of those, you know, if there were blank ballots that were processed in and scanned in, you'll be able to tell which ones of those ballots were valid and which ones were invalid. For example, the kinematic features of a mail-in ballot can be detected. So if ballots were scanned through as a whole piece of paper, they weren't folded, they had potentially laser printed voting marks, the kinematic features of the ballot will be able to detect that on mail-in ballots. So there are measures that you can take to ensure that the will of the Georgia people were represented, but I think as you've seen this morning, that that's in question.
Well, we're actually over on our time. We only have so much budgeted, and we have some other people that are going to testify after our break to some of the things that we have seen here. So I'm going to ask that we wrap this up. Thank our presenters for this morning, and we will reconvene at 2 o'clock. Mr. Smith, thank you for.
Chairman, could I just real quick just make a few statements, a couple of statements, and then I'll be done.
Very briefly, yes, sir.
Yes.
We have lots of people that would like to comment, but we don't have time for that.
I understand, and I appreciate the chairman and the committee's patience. And this morning, you all have received a copy of the lawsuit with our affidavits, and I just wanted to state that our lawsuit is more low tech, if you will. It is not so much based on the Dominion system. We've got hard facts, sworn testimony, very detailed complaint. 40 code violations are alleged, hard numbers violations. Representative Turner talked about the 15,000 folks, and there are a lot of hard numbers. I would also note that our witness, Mr. Brainerd's information was turned over to the GBI, and we believe we have one of the strongest lawsuits of any that's been brought in the country, and we believe that it's going to show the strong irregularities that have occurred in this state, and we thank you for your time. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Glad you're feeling better. members of the committee, we will stand in recess or suspend until 2 p.m. Thank you very much.